Hello, once again, welcome to my home. Let's continue, or take a deep dive today, discussing Chapter 11, Old Age, Jaravaga. This chapter specifically addresses how nature has given us a sign that everything is transient by aging our bodies. This, contrary to what we sometimes think, is not nature's cruelty, but rather its mercy, so that amidst everything that passes, we may recognize what truly remains. So, the central theme of this chapter will focus on this idea. Verse 147. Observe this body, sometimes ill, suffering, and full of vain desires. Never permanent, always changing. In other words, be mindful of the vehicle you have, and observe how it keeps changing, regardless of who you are inside, which does not change as much or as quickly. Recognize that it follows a cycle that does not belong to you. It is a servant of the laws of nature. There would also be laws there are laws for the transformation of our mind, our psyche. But we hesitate, and we are much slower in this inner realm. But the transience of things gives us the opportunity for contrast. And by recognizing the difference between what passes and what remains, we realize that we are what remains. Remember that old story about the theory of impact, of contrast. Between two different things, in the impact, consciousness is born. Between two colors, between sound and silence. In the impact between two realities, consciousness emerges. Our consciousness should position itself in the face of the changes in our bodies and recognize who it truly is. It is what remains. 151. The royal pompous chariots wear out and are destroyed by use, just as our body wears out with age. But the teachings of the wise endure, passing from one to another, and never extinguish. Look, I don't need to elaborate much on this. Here are the teachings of the wise. We are speaking of something that has existed for 2,600 years. That is, if we consider that Buddha himself received this knowledge from someone before him, and perhaps it is much older. It is probably much older. So, these teachings transcend time. As long as there is a person on earth who seeks to understand the meaning of their existence, where all of this is leading. Who are they? These teachings will always be here. In other words, they are permanent, whereas all our material possessions and the desires they nurture are fleeting. They are all unreal. They are the shadows in Plato's cave. 152. This one is intriguing and even a bit sharp, somewhat humorous. The man who does not seek grows old like an ox. He gains weight, but not wisdom. In other words, something like that. Our bodies grow in their desires, in their appetites, while within us, our consciousness remains very thin, very poor, having gathered very few fruits along the way. If you consider that just as the body is nourished by what is proper to it, the soul in the sense of anima, of consciousness, of that which animates us is nourished by what is proper to the soul, then it must be tremendously thin. Because very little nourishment do we concern ourselves with providing for our soul throughout our days. So, it must be emaciated within a body that continues to accumulate because our focus is on the body. Thus, we grow older gaining weight, but not wisdom. And that is sad because, if you think about it, life has a dual trajectory, one descending and the other ascending. The descending trajectory is that of the physical body. The longer we live, the more we lose energy, the more we lose sensory perceptions. We also begin to lose memory, so the body continues to decline. However, we have the opportunity to build another, ascending trajectory, the path of wisdom. The more time passes, the more we can become shrewd, attentive, more understanding, more compassionate, and more perceptive regarding the symbolism of life. At a certain point, there is a turning point where the body declines, but you do not go down with it. Thus, we hear stories of wise individuals who, despite their advanced age, possess an extraordinary ability to respond to life with a presence and energy that surpass even that of their young disciples. These are not merely ancient tales, they represent a real human possibility. However, if we remove this ascending path of wisdom, life becomes a downward slope. The more time passes, the worse we become. In other words, life would be almost a tragedy, culminating in an extremely delicate moment facing death with the naivety of a child who has just begun to live, or with the immaturity of someone who has learned nothing. So pay close attention because all these reflections speak to the drama of a transient life when we identify ourselves with what is fleeting. Once again, I remind you of a passage I greatly appreciate from a writer I often mention, who, to me, is much more than just a writer. He is also a philosopher, Machado de Assis. In the posthumous memoirs of Bras Cubas, nature, like Pandora, grabs him by the collar, lifts him up, and reveals to him a procession of men being swept away and destroyed by time. And she looks into his eyes so that he may contemplate the mystery. What lies beyond all of this? What remains? Then, everywhere, the same idea echoes. Learn about what fades, about what endures, and choose who you are. Given these two possibilities, choose who you truly are. Recognize who you truly are. 153 to 154. In vain I sought the architect of the house of life and death. What misery, to be born and reborn endlessly. Now I know you, O architect, desires and will no longer build the house. The beams, attachments are broken, and the roof has collapsed, destroyed ignorance. Free is my mind, for I have reached the extinction of desires, to the immortal nirvana. I have often spoken to you about that moment in Egypt, which is the weighing of the dead person's heart. Where the heart is placed on the scales of Maat, the goddess of justice, and on the other side, a feather is placed. When a heart weighs less than the feather of Maat, it goes to the beloved. When it weighs more, it returns to the world. What could be within a heart for it to weigh less than a feather? Evidently, those who love material things, who love sensory experiences, all of that is weight. They go to the world where such things can be lived, the world that offers them that possibility. Now, those who love justice, truth, fraternity, and goodness go to the world where these things reign. It is a matter of justice to take each person to where their heart points. So much so that in Egypt, there is a negative confession where a person asks their heart not to testify against them in the tribunal, where it will be weighed. In other words, may our hearts be directed toward essential, spiritual things. If we desire material things, we will return to them. That is exactly what is being stated here. Who is the architect of the house that makes my heart return to the world? My desires, my uncontrollable passions, the need for experiences that only this world can provide. We do not return to the world because an art is evil. We return to the world because our heart asks to return. That to which it is attached, that which we truly love, we will always be walking in that direction. Ask yourself from time to time, make a list of the things you love the most, and see if kindness, justice, or fraternity appear anywhere on that list. If everything we love is material, we will move in that direction. This is quite interesting as well. Make a good list, just for yourself, and observe the directions in which your heart is pointing. Continuing. Chapter 12. The Ego Adavaga. 159. If someone becomes perfect, like the counsel given, then well controlled, in truth, he can direct others. Truly, self-control is the most difficult. This is very similar to Confucius, everyone. Very similar. I have the habit of making these comparisons so that you can see that knowledge and wisdom are like a tree at the top of a mountain. Everyone who has climbed to a certain height sees the same thing, a tree. Those who have not climbed much look up and see nothing or simply a fragment of a leaf. But here we are talking about various traditions around the world. Here, Confucius. Here, Egypt. Here, the Inca. Here, Plato. Men who climbed to a certain height looked up and saw the same thing. So, when you make this comparison, which is very characteristic of our philosophy course, a comparative study, we realize that it is highly unlikely that there was a conspiracy among Confucius, DHAMMAPADA, Buddha, and pre-Columbian civilizations to deceive us. For this to be the case, there must be a truth of nature that we can recover. When we compare, this is very interesting. So, Confucius speaks clearly about this, that one cannot command if one does not know how to obey. A man cannot control another if he does not control himself. He becomes a tyrant. The greatest battle is to control oneself. If he achieves this, he has skill. He knows how to handle all elements of escape. He knows how to tame resistance. In other words, he has a perfect strategy to lead anyone placed under his command. He who does not master himself when dominating another becomes a tyrant. And this is an omnipresent element in most traditions I know. 163. It is easy to do what is harmful and wrong for us. Difficult, in truth, is doing what is right and beneficial. Logically, the upward path requires effort. It is the new path that we still need to build. What is easy, we already have. The new is arduous. It demands that we ascend. Climbing always requires much more effort. In other words, what is difficult for us signifies construction. Something new. That next step forward that I must take, which will define my life as something meaningful. If I have taken a step upward, then this life has not been in vain. Now, ascending is always more challenging. There is also a law of gravity in the psychological realm, as well as in the moral and spiritual dimensions of human beings. Ascending always requires more effort. If everything feels too comfortable, it is likely that we are actually descending. 165. The states of purity or impurity are created by the individual himself, and nothing can be done to purify one individual by another. Once again, Buddha himself says that we should look at the star he points to, not at Buddha's finger. No human being can purify us. They can show us the way. No one can walk the path for us. No one evolves by being towed along. Thus, this purity, this detachment from transient things, and the attachment to that which is intrinsic to the human being, that which truly belongs to us, that which cannot be taken from us at a certain moment, emerges from within us. Someone may encourage us, may show us the way. But anyone who promises to give us spirituality is probably lying, because it is not something that can be given. The construction of the human being is an individual achievement. There are, indeed, those who point the way. This helps us greatly, just as our parents, our teachers, and all those who walked beside us and showed us the way have helped us. But no one was able to walk the path for us. That is not possible, and to wish for it is a fantasy. Chapter 13. The World, Lokavaga. 167 to 168. Do not follow the path of evil. Do not cultivate negligence. Do not run after erroneous ideas. Get up. Observe. He who follows a straight life is happy in this world and the next. Rest in the arms of Dharma, the law of the universe. Dharma, according to Indian tradition, is the arm of God extended over the world. Dharma is the point where we can find more peace, more serenity, because we walk in harmony with nature. We follow the path of least resistance. We follow the path that guides us all together, the universe returning to unity, just as nature, every being in nature, knows its Dharma because it is guided by nature to walk its path. We, however, must consciously find our own. This is the characteristic that distinguishes us as human beings. We must find it through our free will, having countless possibilities, including the option of not acting. To choose, to discover our Dharma, and to walk its path. To walk straight, along the just path, along the middle way. Then, he speaks about indolence, and this is a very interesting point. The worst kind of indolence is not the physical one that keeps us from getting out of bed in the morning. That is merely a slowed reflection of the greater indolence, the one that manifests as a lack of desire to build oneself, a lack of curiosity about who you are and why you are here. A lack of curiosity to discover your mission in the world, your inner name. This is the great indolence, the one that makes us prefer, even though we could be in the driver's seat, consciously steering our lives in the direction we choose, to sit in the back seat, blindfolded, being led without knowing by whom or where to. Because it feels more comfortable. But what is truly comfortable? And for whom is it comfortable? Certainly not for our soul. So, laziness and indolence is the mother of many other vices, for it opens the door for them to enter. 170. If you contemplate the world as a bubble of foam, if you see it only as a mirage, you will not reach the king of death. Interesting, isn't it? When we understand what is fleeting and what is permanent, we are not affected by the loss of the fleeting because we never truly possessed it. We never thought it was ours. So, when it leaves, it does not surprise us. Remember that saying, nothing that is truly yours can be taken from you. This vehicle will be taken from us along with many other things. However, what we truly are, essence, these eyes that gaze upon the world and gather experience through it, this, no one and nothing can take from us. In other words, we stand before the Lord of Death, and we recite before him, as the Bardo Thodol says, our inner name. The Bardo Thodol says, recite your inner name before the Lord of Death, and he will open the passage for you. The Tibetan Book of the Dead. So, it is interesting that the more we identify with what we truly are, the less we fear the loss of the transient. We understand that all things also have an essence, and that we must never separate our heart from the heart of things. But appearance, just like our own appearance, it is natural for it to fade away. It does not truly exist, it is merely a fleeting shadow. This realization creates a sense of security, that nothing profound can ever perish. We do not lose anything that is profound. I remind you of this because it is rare for me to give a lecture without mentioning Khalil Gibran. And in this case, it will be no different. I really appreciate a passage from the letters between Khalil Gibran and Mary Haskell, where he says, "Look, Mary, I am a man of great fear. There are two things that no one will ever be able to convince me of. First, that I do not possess an immortal soul. Second, that my soul could ever be separated from yours." If we adopt this perspective, we do not fear losing anything. I know it is a distant dream, none of us have reached it yet, but considering that if one human being has achieved it, then it is possible for us as well. To know that nothing and no one can separate our essence, our immortal soul, from the soul of those we love. And therefore, not to fear allowing time to take away the transient, just as it once brought it, for it does not belong to us. We must establish a connection between our consciousness and something that endures, the solid ground upon which we set our feet. And we do not fear earthquakes. 172. He who, having freed himself from negligence, becomes vigilant, shines in this world like the moon emerging from the clouds. In other words, they do not get caught up in fantasies and lose focus. It is as if you imagine a child to whom you ask to go to the kitchen and bring a glass. On the way, the child gets distracted by 1,000 toys and, an hour later, returns without the glass. We are that child who enters the world and forgets what we came to seek in it. And when we return to our Father, we arrive without the body. We arrive without that message, without the awareness we came to seek. Because we get entertained by all the shadows we encounter along the way. Thus, focus, awareness, and present attention are practiced in the small things. Little by little, we learn to be increasingly present in body and soul in our lives at every moment. Remember the example of that Zen master who was said to be very wise. One day, someone asked him, "Master, where did you gain so much wisdom?" He replied, simple, "When I am peeling an orange, my awareness is entirely on the knife, the peel, and the orange. That's it, nothing more. That is where I draw so much wisdom from." In other words, vigilance, attention, and focus protect us from becoming attached to illusions and being carried away by them. As Epictetus, the Roman philosopher, would say, protect your mind, and it will protect you. Continuing, 176. He whose words are lies, who transgresses even one article of the doctrine and despises the higher planes of existence, there is no greater evil he can commit. The doctrine as the great law of the universe, the Dharma. He who disrespects the truth disrespects the Dharma. At its core, he is, in many ways, disrespecting reality, truth, and being. What worse thing could he possibly do? Remember another passage from the Dhammapada itself, where it says that no external enemy can harm us more than our own mind. When we do not cherish or love the truth, whether it is manifested in a word or in the law that governs the universe, it means that we have already suffered a great loss. There is not much left till those who have lost the essential. Khalil Gibran, when he speaks in The Prophet of Dwellings, he says, "Why do you lock your doors so tightly? What is inside that you fear so much will be stolen? Do you possess the precious virtue? Do you hold the golden kindness? What do you have inside that is of value? If there is nothing, why do you worry so much? We must be concerned about this. If they steal from us the love for truth, leave the door open. There is not much left to take anyway." 178. The fruit of the first step on the path to nirvana is more valuable than mastering the earth, reaching the sky, or ruling over the universes. Notice how interesting this is. We mentioned this at the beginning because it is a defining trait of Buddhism. It is not about finding a better place in future experiences. It is not about improving or decorating your cave better. It is about leaving the cave. Nirvana is about stepping out of the world of illusions. It is not about making your cage a little more pleasant, comfortable, or ensuring better conditions for your imprisonment in the future. It is about leaving the prison, about obtaining the key. In other words, at this moment, and I find this very interesting because this first step toward nirvana already allows a part of it to be with us here. This holds more value than anything the illusory world could offer us. Because if we are in connection with nirvana in some way, we are already experiencing it. Nirvana is about crossing over to the other shore, leaving the illusory behind and moving toward the real. Remember that example I often give, which comes from our teacher and founder, Jorge Angel Livraga. He speaks of a person locked inside a house, with all the doors and windows shut. This person does not like the sun, they do not engage with it. If one day this person changes their mind and opens the doors and windows, their physical distance from the sun remains the same. However, the sun now illuminates them where they are, simply because they have allowed themselves to come into contact with it. The idea of nirvana is like this sun. I desire it above all else. Just by opening the windows to it, it already illuminates me in this very moment. It is the first step. Chapter 14. The Buddha, Buddhavagga, verse 180. He who has freed himself from desire and greed, to whom nothing can seduce or disturb, how can anyone surprise him, he who leaves no traces? By what means could they be surprised? They leave no footprints. How can you manipulate someone who desires nothing other than to be in harmony with themselves, to fulfill their human role? Notice that when we act according to the world of illusions, we act out of fear and desire all the time. The one who holds what you fear or what you desire in their hands is your master. They can do whatever they want with you. But when what you seek is simply to align yourself with what nature expects of a human being to fulfill your role in the universe, there is no way to manipulate that. When we only seek to align with ourselves, to occupy our space, to live our lives in a sacralized way, satisfaction, the reward, is entirely within. It cannot be manipulated. Therefore, we place ourselves above, beyond any possibility of harm or loss. We possess something that nothing and no one can take from us. This was Plato's idea of the golden man. The gold he sought was not external gold, but internal gold, which nothing and no one can take from us, and which makes a person truly rich and at peace. Because when we possess something that cannot be taken away, we have peace, we have serenity, which is true human happiness. Difficult is it to be born as a human. Difficult is it to live this mortal life. Rare is the opportunity to hear the true law, Dharma. Rare is the birth of a Buddha. Notice that life is truly dramatic. It is difficult to be human. A common human being like us is born as a very innocent, very pure child, without fully understanding the meaning of life. As they begin to mature, all the sensations arise the call of hormones, the pursuit of instincts. Then, in the best case scenario, we are guided by someone who leads us in a good direction. Once we overcome this phase, we begin to mature, and when we reach the peak of wanting to understand something, soon after, death comes. In other words, when we reach our best moment, life ends shortly thereafter. And we experience the world in a way that no other being around us does. The little dog sleeping outside will die just as I will, but it is not aware of this. It does not question where it came from, where it is going, or what mystery follows death. For the dog, this is not a dilemma. It dies peacefully, as if death does not exist. We, however, are conscious of it, we have reflective awareness, and if we do not know how to find answers for it, it turns our lives into a torment. Thus, the human condition carries something dramatic within it. Now, notice that just as the human condition has this aspect, he says, but fortunately, something extremely rare has happened. Someone has found the key. Some people have discovered the key. If you come across such a person, as you are right now, do not miss this opportunity. They are exceedingly rare. Buddhas are rare, the wise ones. If you encounter one of them, do not fail to take the key and learn how to use it. Because if you are in a cage and suffering, and someone gives you the key, but you do not use it, you begin to deserve the cage. You start to bear the demerit of having to remain imprisoned for a longer time. Perhaps you even desire it. So, while we experience the drama of imprisonment, we also have the possibility of the key. Every time you encounter a wise man, you have found the key. Learn to use it. Honor this opportunity, which is his life. Abstain from evil, do good, and purify the mind. This is the teaching of all Buddhas. In other words, it is not an exclusivist tradition. Of all those who have reached the level of enlightenment, or Buddhas of all those who possess the key, who have opened the door and crossed through, all of them love to point the way. They love to lend this key. Very few are willing to receive it, and they all say the same thing: abstain from evil, do good, and purify the mind. Be mindful of the mind, for it is where all of life's dramas and deviations are born. Abstain from all that is evil and seek what is good. Then you might say, but this is so relative. How many times have I heard that? What is good? What is good for you may not be good for me. Look, be careful, be careful. If you have a jar of poison here, you cannot say, this is relative. Even if you don't think it's poison, it will still kill you just the same. We have a human evolutionary path. A path that leads beings to become more human. Values, virtues, and wisdom. Whether you like it or not, this path will make you a better human being. You can choose to follow it or not. But necessarily, this is the path. There's no way around it. We have a path. Human life consists of a journey from ignorance toward wisdom. If you don't want to go now, if you've decided to step back, if you've chosen not to walk this path, that is a freedom you have. But if you want to become truly human, this is the way. There is not an entire set of options. There is a necessary path for us to reach what we want to be, that is, human beings. The only being who can say that everything is relative is the one who is absolute God. For us, as relative beings, that which exists on the same level of relativity as we do is absolute to us. It will become relative the day we surpass it, but not now. The full attainment of the human condition is an absolute for us. Drawing closer to it is good, moving away from it is evil. Believe it or not. This misapplied idea of relativity acts as a solvent of human discernment, of human clarity. Be careful with this, it is widely misunderstood. 186. Not even a shower of gold coins could quench the thirst of desires, for they are insatiable and bring pain. This is what the wise see. Take note, a rain of gold coins would not satisfy the appetite of desires. Imagine that you have a monster in your house, a terrible beast, and you want to eliminate it. You wouldn't think that you could get rid of it by feeding it so much that it becomes so fat it bursts. That would be foolish. It will only grow stronger and stronger, and soon it will break through the bars of the cage where you can find it. And before long, it will devour you. Do not think that you can destroy the beast by feeding it. You will do the opposite. You must gradually deprive it of sustenance, so that it becomes weaker and more susceptible to being controlled by you. So, do not think that we will master our most primal desires by giving them everything they crave. Rather, we must impose a regime of austerity where the human aspect prevails over the animalistic. It is not about eliminating the animal's appetites. Instead, it is about taming this little beast so that we are the ones in control. We must be like the centaur, where the human governs the animal, and not like the minotaur, where the animal governs the human. We know what these two creatures did in mythology. The centaur was the mentor of great heroes. Already wise, the human aspect ruled over the animal. Meanwhile, the minotaur was a destroyer, a savage beast that devoured men. In other words, Greek mythology clearly illustrates the fate of those who fail to govern their animalistic nature. How can the wise find joy even in celestial pleasures? When desires fade, joy arises. Notice how interesting this is, because every time we look at history and see a man who attains what we might call the pleasures of the soul, duty fulfilled, true fraternity, genuine generosity, and kindness put into action, has access to these higher pleasures, as well as the more coarse pleasures of the material world. Why does he always prefer the higher pleasures? He is not ignorant, he is wise. If he prefers the higher pleasures, it must be because they are far superior. They must have a far more refined taste. They must be much more fulfilling. Thus, we will only experience them if we believe that these pleasures exist. And indeed, they do exist, and those who experience them would never trade them for any other. And those who experience them are not ignorant, they are wise. Therefore, they must make the right choices. To imagine that being human is also something pleasurable, perhaps the greatest experience one can have. You do not renounce animal pleasures, but once you have experienced this, you would never trade it for anything. Whereas the one who only has animal pleasures, nothing beyond that. Therefore, they have no currency for exchange, no way to compare. 193. Rare are those who have the vision of truth. A Buddha does not arise everywhere, and where he is born, happy are those who surround him. Victory over death. In other words, a Buddha, an enlightened being who has attained Buddhahood and illumination, is someone who possesses the vision of truth to the highest degree that a human being can achieve. And all those who are with him, not just physically, because merely being physically present is like a spoon in the soup, which does not taste the soup, but those who are with him by understanding, by striving to see the world as he saw it. Sometimes you realize that we might, at this moment, be a little closer to a wise man than someone who was physically by his side during the historical period in which he lived. If we try, within our capabilities, to see the world as he saw it, we are close to him. And it is a great privilege to be close to a wise person. Let me briefly open a parenthesis to share something with you. An Indian story from a book called Ocean of the River of Tales, which tells the story of a wise man named Narada. This sage, on one occasion, the Indians have a vast number of gods, and there are beings who serve as intermediaries between gods and humans, great sages, like Narada, for example. He was human, a rishi. Very wise, he would travel back and forth between the heavens of the gods and the earth of men. On one occasion, he arrived before Vishnu, the great god, Vishnu. Narada and Vishnu. Vishnu said to him, "O Narada, tell me, how was it to be in the company of my wise followers who dwell on earth? For there is nothing better than being in the presence of a good man." And Narada hesitated for a moment, thinking, well, there are so many good things on earth. Could it really be that there is nothing better than being in the presence of a good man? Without Narada even voicing his doubt, Vishnu perceived his uncertainty. Then Vishnu said, "Did you not understand well? I will give you an experience. You will descend to earth. Do you see that tree in the center of that grove? At this very moment, a bird has just been born there. It has just broken through the shell of its egg. Go there and ask that little bird why there is no greater privilege than being in the company of the good." Narada immediately descends to fulfill the will of the god. When he arrives, the little bird is still emerging from the shell, stretching its tiny wings. Still delicate, Narada approaches the bird and says, "You are a good bird. Tell me why the greatest privilege that exists is being in the company of the good." And the little bird suddenly opens its eyes wide, looks at him, and boom, falls dead. Narada is deeply startled. What did I do wrong? He returns to Vishnu, who says, "Well, it didn't work this time, but let's try again. Do you see that farm where a very devoted, very good man lives? His little cow has just given birth to a calf. It was just born. Go there and ask this calf why it is a privilege to be in the company of the good." And when Narada arrives, the farmer says, "Oh, my good and wise one, what a great omen. Come here so you can meet my newborn calf." When he arrives, the little calf is still trying to balance on its legs, having just been born. He asks, "Oh my beautiful creature, tell me why." It is a privilege, the greatest of privileges, to be in the presence of the good. And it is said that the little animal widened its eyes, looked at him, and suddenly fell dead. Narada is startled by what just happened. Is this one of Vishnu's tricks? What is he trying to show me with this? He returns to the presence of the god. Then Vishnu says to him, "No, I know it doesn't seem to make sense yet, but persist a little longer, and soon you will understand. Do you see that kingdom over there?" He immediately felt a shiver. In that kingdom, there is a king who has just had his firstborn. His wife has given birth to a little baby. I want you to go there and ask that baby. He immediately panics, but in the end, since Vishnu is commanding him, he goes. When he arrives, the king recognizes him and says, "Oh, what a wonderful surprise. Come and give your blessings to my prince, who has just been born." Narada, still very suspicious, enters the room where the baby is, asks the nurses to leave, approaches the baby, and asks, "I have come by Vishnu's command, and I must ask you why." That the greatest privilege lies in the company of the virtuous. It is said that the baby opens his bright eyes and speaks to him. "Oh, Narada, are you asking me this? I am living proof of what you are saying. I had just arrived in the world in the form of a small bird. I was still stretching my wings when I opened my eyes and saw you, the purest of men. My soul was uplifted, and I was reborn as a calf. Behold, my fortune was greater than I had expected, for as a newborn calf, I could barely balance on my legs. When I open my eyes, I see once again, and my soul was uplifted, and behold, I am born here as a baby. In other words, I am living proof that the greatest privilege in the world is to be in the company of the good. Understand, we are not here to engage in a debate about the death of animals or anything of the sort. This is a myth, a little story that illustrates how our soul is uplifted when we surround ourselves with that which uplifts us, with that which is good. Even if it is not a physical person, but rather a wise figure who lived 2,000 years ago, whom we realize can be close to us if we understand and inherit their message. Placing ourselves before goodness, bringing it constantly to our awareness. The presence of goodness causes our soul to be uplifted, inviting it to rise higher. In other words, no one can walk the path for us, but if we are willing to walk, a good guide helps tremendously. If our intention is to ascend, a good guide can show us a highly effective path. So, it is important for us to recognize this. We need to bring our awareness to the presence of goodness. One of the reasons we turn to some of the most beautiful books in human history is precisely for this purpose. Constantly, as often as we can, we must bring to our awareness the presence of goodness, so that it may create affinity, form bonds, and propel us upward. Chapter 15, Happiness, Sukhavagga. Verse 200. Truly happy are we who desire nothing to possess. In serenity, we shine like divine beings. Obviously, here he speaks as a sage, as someone who has already arrived. But we realize that evolution is like a series of steps. It is a staircase. The one who has climbed a single step in a certain way experiences the same joy as the one who has climbed the entire staircase proportional to their level of possibility, but still achieves a victory, a mastery over our weaknesses, a step forward that we take toward the light, allowing ourselves to be filled with an immense happiness. You must know, for example, what the pleasure of a duty fulfilled feels like. When so many difficulties arise along the way, yet you overcome them and go forward, doing what your conscience has guided you to do. That which you consider to be just, noble, and good. How do you go to bed at night? With the sleep of the just, that feeling of healthy exhaustion, of having fulfilled your mission. Today was a day worthy of a human being. Whoever looks back at the traces of today will say, a human being passed through here. That alone is already a state of grace, a state of peace. Fantastic. As the book The Light on the Path says, when we reach the flower that blooms after the storm, there will still be other storms in the future, but the peace and beauty of that flower, we will never lose it. We will keep it in our hearts. Every time we fight the good fight and emerge victorious, even if it is a small battle, a bit of that peace stays with us at every step of the way. In other words, the wise one who has overcome the entire staircase and the humble human being who has climbed, even if it is only the first step, in a certain way, they both experience a very similar happiness. 201. Victory generates hatred, for the defeated lies in misfortune. Only happy is he who is serene before victories and defeats. For those who have watched our series of commented readings on the Tao Te Ching, there is something quite disconcerting. When he says that envy when you are envied by someone in a certain way, that envy is, to some extent, your own responsibility, because of the way you display your victory. In some way, your victory weighs heavily. It is humiliating for those who have been defeated. Even if no words are spoken, even if no discourtesy is shown, your attitude in victory wounds others. Because there are those who are victorious and yet envied by no one. Because of the way they live their victory, with the sobriety and serenity they maintain in the face of it. So we should, first and foremost, strive to be light. That nothing we achieve becomes a burden for those who have not yet achieved it, but rather a point of reference. And secondly, that we should never desire victory at the expense of someone else's defeat, which is more or less what we were discussing earlier, the dilemma of our present time. Success always seems to depend on someone else's failure. We know how to win over others, but we do not know how to win together. And with this kind of mindset, fraternity becomes impossible. Yet fraternity is a necessary step toward unity. And unity is the very essence of the divine. (203) The greatest pain is the hunger for passions, but the greatest sorrow is the harm caused by the disharmony, the elements of life that constitute the existence of beings. In other words, the greatest pain is being addicted, in that which harms you, in that which binds you to the earth in such a way that, when you try to elevate your consciousness towards something more noble, to be in the presence of goodness, you find yourself unable to do so. It is a level of imprisonment, of addiction, where that which is more subtle no longer stimulates you to contemplate it. It is as if you imagine a simple example of a person who is accustomed to vulgar conversations. And when you try to steer them toward discussing something more noble, they find it uncomfortable, burdensome, and it makes them feel uneasy. Or someone who is accustomed to music of very poor quality, when you invite them to listen to something more harmonious, they feel uncomfortable. Passions create an addiction that robs a person of the ability to lift their head from the mud in which they are trapped, because they begin to reject what is good. Therefore, it is the greatest illness an insatiable hunger for passions. And the greatest sorrow is our inability to harmonize what exists within us, which means we will not be able to harmonize anything outside of us either. We will leave the world just as disharmonious as we found it. We are incapable of managing our physical body without it becoming an obstacle, managing our emotions without them being so unstable that they drain all our energy, managing our mind without it being so scattered that it prevents us from grasping the mystery of life. If we manage to harmonize what lives within us, we have the potential to harmonize the world we live in. Remember what I always repeat, that phrase that may seem a bit enigmatic. The deeper within, the further beyond. Once again, I reiterate to you, I am not speaking of things I have already mastered. I am a philosopher. I am speaking of things that, to me, it is tremendously important to place my awareness before, and to learn to love them, so that one day I may dare to reach them. But like everyone else, I am striving to achieve this. Like everyone else, I stumble and rise again. A philosopher is not someone who has overcome all difficulties, but someone with an unyielding spirit of self-improvement. And they will never give up. It is not about never falling, but about falling and rising 1,000 times, as many times as necessary. A philosopher is not perfect, but possesses the drive for continuous improvement. This ensures that they never stop moving forward. 208. When you find a resolute and alert man, enlightened, judicious, with great discernment, patience, and virtue, follow him as the moon follows the path of the stars. Finding such a person, as we have mentioned before, in person, it is an immense privilege, but even if it is through a book, a work, or a tradition, we can still make them present in our lives. Perhaps, as you become enamored with the teachings of a wise person, you may feel them as close to you. as a human being who is physically by your side but unable to truly be present. Sometimes we live under the same roof, yet remain deeply distant from those who share our home. Closeness is not merely physical. So may we learn to recognize goodness and follow it wherever it leads us. Chapter 16. Transitory Pleasure, Payavaga. Verse 211. Avoid attachment to anything, for there is no suffering for those who, with serenity, neither cling nor have aversion. Be mindful, for when we discuss this, I believe this is one of the most challenging verses. And when you say, well, I won't become attached to a friend, I won't become attached to a loved one, it doesn't mean that. You will love a friend, you will love a loved one. Attachment is not positive. Attachment is a form of dependency, a kind of need to have the other person clinging to you as a witness to your personal experience. That is selfish toward the other person. One who loves pushes forward by being loved in the direction of their star, their well-being. One who truly loves sets free. This attachment, this dependency, this need to be with the other makes separation, which is inevitable, unbearably painful. More out of a sense of possession than out of true love. Because one who truly loves, in some way, knows that they will never be separated from what they love, from whom they love. So, attachment is not the same as love. Those who truly love do not cling. They do not hold on, nor do they need the other to constantly reaffirm their emotional needs. One who truly loves, I know it sounds like a cliché, but it holds truth. One who truly loves sets free. Yet something will always remain permanently connected. 212 to 216. From selfish affection, attachment, sensuality, desires of the senses, and greed arise sorrow and fear. Free from these, we will feel neither sorrow nor fear. Notice that it is precisely this kind of love those things that you will inevitably lose that generate sorrow and fear. When we become attached to something, it is as if you imagine me placing an ice cube in your hand. And I say, look, this is the most important thing in your life, take care of it. Well, ice is ice, it will melt. And as it follows its inevitable course, you will suffer tremendously. The things that come into our lives, we feel this way about them. They are like lines, and when these elements follow their course, we fail to grasp what in the other will truly remain with us forever. So, 212216. From selfish affection, attachment, sensuality, desire of the senses, and greed arise sorrow and fear. Free from these, we will feel neither sorrow nor fear, so at any moment what I desire may be taken from me. One who is attached lives in constant fear, in perpetual insecurity, and, consequently, in an ongoing state of suffering. And finally, in verse 218, those who, with determination, keep a firm mind, are freed from sensual pleasures and go against the current of passions in worldly life, are on the frontier of the ineffable nirvana. In other words, the one who detaches from what is transient masters their mind and does not stray from their path is at the gates of nirvana. Nirvana is not a physical place. Nirvana is a state of consciousness. It can be right here. When we are ready for it, it will be here, before us. It is not a specific time or space. Nirvana is the dwelling place of those consciousnesses that have detached from illusions. This is how you detach yourself enough. Some degree of nirvana? You can already experience it. That peace of those who know that nothing true can ever be taken from them. Well, that's where we'll stop for today. In our next lecture, we will continue with a few more chapters. Don't forget, I hope you are reading the book, that you may engage in meaningful reflections. Do not allow yourselves to be restricted. This is not a Buddhist religion. These are philosophical principles that apply to any human being who seeks wisdom. Think about it. Reflect on it for a moment. Thanks.